So welcome back to Bootstrap 3 Essential Training. We're still working with our grid systems. This is Understanding the Grid System Part 2. So let's go ahead and move into our development environment and continue our demonstrations. Alright, so let's move into our development environment and pick up where we left off on the last tutorial. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this presentation. First thing I want to do, let's confirm that we've got our Apache server up and running, as we do with all our tutorials. Go ahead and get rid of that. I'm going to load up my text editor. For this particular exercise, I'm going to be using brackets. I was actually talking to one of my students last night, and they had asked if I would kind of switch up my text editors, because not everyone uses Sublime Text 2, which is a very good point. And a text editor is a text editor, but he's got a valid point. I mean, I really should use some different text editors, so we'll use brackets for the next few demonstrations. I'm also going to bring up my web browser so you can see where we left off with the last presentation. We actually set up our 12-column display. We did an 8 and a 4, and then we did 3 4s. And we're using that medium size column grid, which we have set up here. I'm going to go ahead and take this out. Let's do a save as first. Let's save this as grid_2.html so that you can keep all the different exercise files that we have. I'm going to go ahead and pull this out and make sure I'm on the grid 2 now, which is the one I want to be working with. I'm going to go ahead and pull out all the divs that we've done in the previous exercise for this demonstration. So I'm just going to delete these from our screen. Again, we're working with the grid2.html file. I'm going to go ahead and save those changes. Let's go ahead and go into our browser and load up the grid 2, which we should have nothing on it now because we basically have taken out all the content that we had from the previous exercise. Now let's go ahead and look at another class that we can use inside here. I'm going to go back into my text editor. Under that first row, let's go ahead and put in 2 more divs. Actually, I see that I've actually put this row in twice. Let's go ahead and pull that out. We don't want that guy there. That'll goof us up. I'm going to put in 2 divs. These are going to be 6-column divs, as you can see from the screen. Let's go ahead and give those a class from that color 1 class that we used in the previous exercise, just so that they have a class and we can see them. So I'm just going to come after that first class and just put in color 1. And I'm going to add that to both of our divs, so you can see how this appears on the screen. Again, I want you to get a very good understanding of how these grid systems work, because it is one of the really strong points of using Bootstrap. Now you'll see that we have the 2 6-column divs on the screen, but again, as we collapse this browser window, you'll notice that they stack. So we're going to look at ways that doesn't have to stack that particular way if that's not what we're looking for with our websites. But the first thing I want to do is I want to show you how to turn a fixed width grid layout into a full width by what we talked about earlier with that container. You'll notice right now I'm using the container class, and that's giving us that container that has the built-in padding and margin. If we actually add the fluid to it, as we talked about in our first tutorial when we first started looking at containers, you'll notice it does change that so it goes edge to edge. It takes up the entire viewport, or the entire window of our browser. That's the biggest difference between the container and the container fluid. So go ahead and save that change so you can see it once again, and you'll see now that they actually come in based on what type of container we're using for our rows and our columns. One other thing I want to point out that's kind of important is if we don't want the columns to stack in the smaller devices, you'll notice as our viewport changes here, as it gets smaller, these columns stack on top of one another. And then once it gets to a large viewport size, they go side to side. If we don't want them to stack, there are ways to actually address that. We can actually use different types of sizing. So let me go ahead and copy these columns here. I'm just going to do a Control-C on the PC, Command-C on the Mac. I'm going to put those in our next row. Let's go ahead and close this up so it cleans it up a little bit. I like to try to keep my code clean. Let's go ahead and save that change, and right now there's no difference. If we actually refresh our browser window, we're going to see the exact same thing. But what we can do is we can actually make these. Let's change this from a column 6. Let's make it extra small, and let's say at extra small we want this to be 12. And then we we can say column at medium size, we want this to be 6. So what we're doing now is we're actually giving it 2 different designations based on how it's set up. And actually for medium size, let's make this 8. And what I want to do now is I'm going to take this same 2 classes, because now we're actually using 2 different classes inside of our class setting for our columns. And I'm going to paste this in the one below it. And I'm going to say again, at column extra small, I want you to be 6. And I want the one alongside of you, I've got this one set to 8. And I want this one set to 4. So again, we're looking at this 12 column display. Let's go ahead and save that change. And actually I want this 6. Let's go ahead and save that change. So what we've done now is we've set at an extra small viewport, I want you to be 6 columns across. At a medium sized viewport, I want you to be 8 columns across. And then the same thing with the div below it. So let's go ahead and refresh that. And you'll see that right now we've got this, and actually I'm going to change this because it's actually not 6 columns anymore. Because right now we're actually at a medium display, so we're seeing 8 and 4. Make sure we save our changes so we get rid of that text. We're seeing 8 and 4, and as we change the display, I want you to notice that now it's gone to 6 and 6, and they're not stacked. They're actually side by side because we're in that small column. So we've actually set 2 different configurations for this particular row based on how the viewport is configured or how it's set up to be viewed on that particular viewport. So you'll notice as we get small, we have 6 and 6. And as we went into the medium, it jumps to 8 and 4. Another huge point about using Bootstrap. Let me show you another example. And we actually have the sizes that we can use in here. We have large for LG, we have medium MD, we have small SM, and we have extra small XS. So let's go ahead and do another demonstration in the next row below it. Let me go ahead and copy these divs. Go ahead and paste those divs in place. I actually want one additional div for this one. And I'm actually going to give this a different color. Let's actually make this one 3, because we actually have 3 settings up there in our internal styles. And what I want to do here is let's go ahead and demonstrate a different one. So I want to set up my columns for a medium and again a small, but I don't want them to stack. So I'm going to say 4, 4, and 4 if you're extra small, and 4, 4, and 4 if you're medium. So basically what we're doing is we're taking the same settings. Let's go ahead and save that change and refresh our browser window. And you notice now I have 3 columns in my larger viewport. As I go to the smaller viewport, you notice it still remained at 3 columns because again, I want to maintain my 3 columns based on the viewport size, but had I not put this extra small in there, they would have stacked like they did on the top. Remember when we go to this top, as we get to the smaller viewports, they stack on top of one another. Let me go ahead and see how they've stacked. Well, because we have the smaller set up as 4 columns, they don't stack on that bottom one. And that'll go as small as our viewport goes based on our settings. So again, we can use these different size columns for our different viewports, whether it be a mobile device, a tablet, a laptop, or a PC. And you can actually configure these. And I've actually set up some of my websites where I've got 4 different size settings in each particular div based on what I'm trying to do with that particular site. The one thing you want to be aware of, I'm just going to change the color of that second one. The one thing that you want to be aware of when you're doing this is you want to make certain you don't get the columns so small that the content inside of it can't be seen. And as we work more through the Bootstrap tutorials, you're going to see me use different demonstrations of that as we move forward. All right, so before we move on, let's talk a little bit more about these column widths and these different size columns that we can use inside of Bootstrap, because I want you to have a good grasp on this before we get into the rest of the demonstrations. Let me go ahead and minimize my text editor and my browser window. And inside your tutorial files, you're going to find a PDF that actually has the viewport sizes for the Bootstrap grid system. This is based on Bootstrap 3. As Bootstrap 4 comes out, if there's any changes to this, I'm going to go ahead and update this course. But for right now, for extra small devices, in other words, phones that are less than 768 pixels, the grid behavior is horizontal at all times. The container width is automatic. The prefix that we're going to use is the .col or -XS and then the number of columns that we want. Obviously, the number of columns, the max number of columns for that particular row is going to be 12, and that's consistent across all the different sizes. Our column width is going to be automatic based on the small device. The gutter width, we have 50 pixels on each side of the column, so that's 30 pixels total. So keep that in mind as you're setting up your pages. These are nestable. We can include offsets and we can include column ordering. And that'll be in a future grid tutorial as we move forward in the grid. You're going to see what nestable offsets and the column ordering is. For small devices which are greater than or equal to 768 pixels, the container width will be 750 pixels. The class that we're going to use is going to be .col-sm- and again the number of columns. Again, that's 12 columns max. Our column width for that particular small devices like tablets, 62 pixels. Keeping in mind that we've got that gutter width of 15 pixels on each side. And again, everything's nestable. We have offsets, we have column ordering. In our medium devices, which are normal normal desktops, so that's anything that's greater than 992 pixels across. Our container width is 970 pixels. The class prefix we're going to use is the col-md- again the number of columns, and again 12 columns max. The column width is normally 81 pixels, and again keep in mind our gutter width. And then for larger devices, and that's desktops that have a screen resolution of greater than 1200 pixels across, greater than or equal to, our container width is 1170. Our class prefix is going to be the .com-lg, and our column width is going to be 97 pixels. So that gives you an idea of how these actual classes are set up inside the Bootstrap CSS file. And again, we're going to do a couple more tutorials on the grid system so we can talk about the nestable, the offsets, and column ordering.